Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The stars twinkled outside the massive windows of the Imperial throne room. But within, a storm was brewing. Queen Zaria, the supreme ruler of the Zanari Empire, paced the length of her chamber, her sharp black and silver skin reflecting the soft, unnatural glow of the lights above. Her thoughts, once clouded with doubts, were now sharper, more dangerous than ever. The weight of her crown pressed heavily on her, a reminder of all the duties and sacrifices that came with the title of queen. Yet, despite her immense power, there was one thing she couldn't control: her inability to bear children. The Zanari, a species of powerful and ancient aliens, had evolved for one singular purpose: to conquer, expand, and reproduce. Their empire spanned countless star systems, each colony a testament to their might. The queen's role was to ensure the survival of their species, and to do that, she had to produce heirs. However, despite her many years of marriage to the elder king Taliax, she remained barren. Taliax, once a magnificent warrior in his youth, had grown frail and weak with age. His once ruthless eyes had become clouded with the burden of years, and his body was no longer the indomitable force it once had been. Zaria had always respected him, but respect was no longer enough. Her people demanded an heir she could not give them. The Zanari had one rule above all others: the queen must reproduce or risk the extinction of their kind. For years, Zaria had stood by Taliax, desperate for a solution. They had tried everything, from advanced medical treatments to spiritual rituals, anything that could help her conceive. But after decades of failure, Zaria had finally come to a grim realization. Her marriage to Taliax was not just a personal disappointment, it was a threat to her reign. No matter how much she had once cared for him, Zaria could not afford weakness in her lineage. Her people, her empire, would not survive without a new generation to rule them. And so, in a cold, calculated decision, she had abandoned her elderly husband. Taliax, once the proud and feared ruler of the Zanari Empire, had been left behind on their homeworld, forsaken by the one being he had trusted the most. As Zaria stood before the holoscreen displaying the sprawling world of their capital, a new wave of guilt hit her, but only for a moment. Her responsibility now lay with the future, not with the past. Her eyes hardened as she watched the image of her father, the former emperor, standing proudly beside her in the royal archives. The weight of his expectations crushed down on her. Zaria had no choice but to move forward. The Zanari needed an heir, and for that she would have to break tradition. The ancient ways were no longer viable. She would find a solution, one that would preserve her people and her dynasty. "Your Majesty," came a voice from behind her. It was Terran, her most trusted advisor and the only one she could confide in. He was tall, with silver-blue skin that shimmered in the light. His expression was unreadable as he approached her. "Speak," Zaria said curtly, her voice tight with the weight of her thoughts. "Word has spread, my queen. The court is restless. They question your decision to abandon the king." Terran's voice was low, but there was a note of concern there. "Many fear that the empire will fracture without a strong heir." Zaria turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Let them speak. It does not matter. I will find another way." Her tone left no room for argument. Terran hesitated. "You know that the old ways are sacred. The empire may not accept a new way so easily." "Then they are fools," she snapped, her claws scraping across the surface of the throne. "My first priority is survival, not tradition." "But there are other candidates, Your Majesty," Terran said cautiously. "Other suitors who could—" "Enough!" Zaria barked, her voice vibrating through the air like thunder. "The court is filled with old men who are only concerned with power. They cannot help me. I will find a solution on my own." She inhaled deeply, her gaze turning back to the stars. "I will find a man who can bear me a child." Terran stood in silence, knowing better than to argue further. The queen had made up her mind, but inside, he feared the consequences of her actions. The Zanari people had always been loyal to their rulers, But there were whispers that even the most faithful would not forgive such a break from tradition. And there was another concern, one that gnawed at him in the quiet moments. What if the queen found someone too different? Would that threaten the very essence of their empire? Zarya did not notice the concern in her advisor's eyes. Her thoughts were already elsewhere. She had heard rumors of a distant planet on the edge of the known universe, one that was home to a species unlike any the Zanari had encountered before. Their strength and potential for reproduction were unmatched, and their abilities could be harnessed for the future of the Zanari. The royal cruiser glided silently through the black void of space, cutting through the vast emptiness with a precision that only the Zanari fleet could achieve. Queen Zarya stood at the front of the ship, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. They were millions of light years from her homeworld, and the journey had been long and exhausting, yet it was nothing compared to the weight of the decision she had made. For the first time in years, she felt the full gravity of her isolation. The ship's crew, composed of her most loyal soldiers, kept their distance. They were loyal, but they were also fearful. No one dared question her decisions, but the whispers among the crew were impossible to ignore. Some believed she had gone mad. Others thought her a ruthless dictator. Only a few understood what she was truly after: survival. The man she sought wasn't just anyone. His species, humanity, had been mentioned in reports from scattered alien encounters, often dismissed as primitive and inconsequential. But Zarya was no fool. She had read the data in detail. The humans were different. Their potential to reproduce rapidly, their adaptability, and their strength. These were the qualities that made them the perfect candidates to help her produce an heir. She had long since abandoned the ancient tradition of breeding within her own species. That path had failed her. Now she would create her own destiny. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime, and the voice of her captain crackled through the intercom. "Your Majesty, we are approaching the coordinates. We'll be entering the human star system shortly." Zarya straightened, her posture regal despite the deep, gnawing sense of urgency inside her. "Understood," she replied curtly. Moments later, the vastness of the human solar system came into view, a collection of planets, moons, and asteroid fields surrounded by the blue and green hue of Earth. Zarya's heart pulsed with an unfamiliar feeling as she gazed at the planet below. This world had been observed from afar for years, and it was time to make her presence known. The cruiser descended rapidly, its shields reflecting the light of the sun as it broke through the atmosphere. Zarya's mind raced with anticipation. She had come to this planet for one reason: to find him. The man who could fulfill her need. The man who could change the fate of her empire. The first human she encountered was not the one she sought. She had landed in a small city on Earth, near a sprawling wilderness. The humans, with their crude technology and primitive weapons, were an amusing spectacle to her. They hadn't yet unlocked the true potential of their species, but they were far from being helpless. As Zarya stepped down from her cruiser, her form shimmering in the light, the people around her froze. A mixture of fear and awe filled their eyes. Her beauty, her strength, and her alien presence overwhelmed them. Some dropped to their knees, others backed away in terror. She was used to this reaction. After all, she was the queen, a creature of godlike power and command. The Zanari had ruled for centuries, and she had been their queen for decades. But as she scanned the crowd, she felt an unease. She wasn't looking for reverence. She was looking for something else, something more. She waited for a moment, letting the tension build, until her sharp eyes caught sight of him. He was different from the others. Tall, with broad shoulders and a chiseled jawline, the man's expression was one of defiance, not fear. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a ripple through her core. His posture was relaxed, but Zarya could sense the strength he was hiding beneath the surface. He was not like the others. He didn't cower. He didn't kneel. The moment their gazes met, Zarya knew. This was him. She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. The crowd parted before her, but the man remained standing, his eyes unwavering. "You," Zarya said, her voice laced with authority. Yet something softer, something almost magnetic, began to creep into her tone. "You are who I seek." The man, his face unreadable, said nothing at first. But there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice steady, though the hint of caution remained. "I am Queen Zaria of the Zanari Empire," she answered, her voice calm, her tone regal. "And you are the one who will help me save my people." His brow furrowed slightly, but his posture remained unchanged. "Help you? What do you mean?" Zaria's lips curled into a slight smile, a mix of pride and determination. "You are a human, and your species possesses what mine lacks. Reproduction, strength, potential. I have come to offer you something. In exchange for your assistance." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Zaria thought he might refuse. But instead, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "What makes you think I'll help you?" he asked, his voice calm, but his gaze now filled with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. Zaria felt the pull of his confidence, his resistance. It made him more intriguing, more necessary, because I am offering you a chance to change the fate of your entire species. A place in the future of the Zanari Empire alongside me. Together we could rule the stars. For the first time, the man looked her up and down, considering her offer. Zaria was used to being desired, but something in his gaze made her pause. This was not a simple conquest of power or submission. This was something else, something deeper. "I don't know what you're offering, but I don't play by anyone's rules but my own," he said, his tone firm. The silence between them stretched for a long moment, the weight of her offer hanging heavy in the air. Zaria watched the man before her, her piercing eyes studying his every movement. He was unlike any human she had encountered in the vastness of space. Unimpressed, unafraid, and distinctly resolute. Most would have bowed or trembled in her presence. But not this one. Zaria's instincts screamed at her to take control, to assert her dominance and bend him to her will. But something about his calm defiance intrigued her. She had seen the strength of her own kind, but this human, this man, held a different kind of power. It was raw and untapped, and she was determined to understand it. "I do not offer this lightly," Zaria said, her voice calm but insistent. "The future of my empire depends on your cooperation. You will father my heir, and in return, I will ensure the survival of your species." The man remained silent for a beat, his expression unreadable. The crowd around them had grown tense, watching this strange exchange between their queen and the alien stranger. Zaria could feel the eyes of the people upon her, but her focus never wavered from the man. Finally, he spoke. "You're asking me to trust you, but why should I? You've come to my planet, you've threatened my people, and now you want me to help you create some kind of hybrid heir for your empire. What's in it for me?" His words were sharp, filled with skepticism and a clear desire to understand her true intentions. Zaria respected that. It was rare to find someone with such a direct, questioning nature. "Everything I offer is for the future," she replied, her tone unwavering. "The Zanari Empire is vast, but we are at a crossroads. Without an heir, we risk stagnation. We risk extinction. You and only you can change that. In return, I will give you power. More power than your world could ever imagine." The man's eyes narrowed, but this time, there was a glimmer of curiosity in them. Zaria could see the gears turning in his mind. He was not convinced, but he was considering it. "I'm not interested in your empire's power," he said, taking a step closer, his voice steady. "I want something more personal. I want control over my own future. You're asking me to sacrifice something without knowing what I'll get in return." Zaria's gaze softened just slightly. She had anticipated this. "I am offering you a future in which you have no limitations. The Zanari will honor your position. You will be more than a mere partner. You will have influence, autonomy, and the chance to shape the future of your people alongside mine." The man seemed to mull over her words, his jaw clenched in thought. He was calculating. Zaria could see that he was testing her just as much as she was testing him. You think I'm just going to help you because you say I'll have power? He asked with a skeptical laugh. What if I refuse? What will you do then? Zaria's eyes glinted dangerously as she studied him. There was an undeniable sense of danger in his tone, but there was also something else, something that stirred a deep recognition within her. She had never encountered someone like him before. He was not a subject to be conquered. He was a partner to be earned. You misunderstand me, she said, her voice low but filled with an edge of finality. This is not an offer you can refuse. The Zanari do not simply walk away from opportunity. And neither will you. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His eyes were intense, his resolve evident. I don't care who you are. If you want my help, you'll have to earn my trust. Prove to me that I'm not just another pawn in your game. Zaria felt a flicker of admiration for the man. He wasn't swayed by her power, nor was he easily intimidated. He wanted something deeper, something she wasn't sure she had the ability to give. She had no time for games, no patience for subtleties. Yet here she was, faced with a challenge that was unlike anything she had ever known. Very well, Zaria said, her voice steady but filled with a new intensity. You want trust? Then let me show you who I truly am. With a single motion, she extended her hand toward him. It was a gesture of both power and invitation, an offer to enter her world, to see the true extent of her abilities. The man didn't hesitate, and though there was wariness in his eyes, he took her hand. In that moment, the bond between them shifted. Zaria felt something unfamiliar stir within her. An energy that wasn't just physical, but something far deeper. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about understanding, about connection. The human before her wasn't simply a means to an end. He was a challenge she was beginning to enjoy. You want proof? Zaria's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Then follow me. I will show you what I'm capable of. With a single command, she gestured to the ground below, and the vast city of humans around them seemed to shimmer and shift. Her mind reached out, tapping into the neural networks of the surrounding area, controlling the electromagnetic fields to create a visible illusion of grandeur. The air thickened with energy as towering holograms appeared, representing her Zanari Empire's vast reach. The human, his eyes wide with awe, watched in silence as Zaria demonstrated her power. The illusion didn't just show the might of her empire. It revealed the extent of her intelligence, her mastery of technology, and her ability to bend the physical world to her will. Is this not proof enough? She asked, her voice carrying the weight of the world behind it. The man stood in silence, his gaze shifting from the spectacular display to her eyes. There was no fear, only a deep curiosity. Slowly, he nodded. This is impressive, he admitted, his voice almost grudging. But trust isn't just about power. It's about something more. You've shown me your strength. Now show me your humanity. Zaria stared at him, feeling the full weight of his words. She was a queen, a conqueror, and yet for the first time, she realized that her power alone might not be enough to win him over. She had to be something more. Zaria stood still, her mind racing as she processed the man's words. Show me your humanity. The phrase echoed in her mind, a challenge unlike any she had faced. Power, strength, dominance. These were qualities she had always wielded with ease. But humanity? What did she know of that? She was the ruler of the Zanari, a species built on conquest and survival. Emotions, vulnerability, compassion. These were not things she had ever needed, or so she had convinced herself. The human before her, however, had no fear of her power. He saw beyond her title, beyond the crown and the strength that had once made her invincible. He wanted something deeper, something raw and real. As she stood there, facing him, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Her mind, typically a fortress, faltered. What could she possibly offer that would satisfy him? What could she reveal about herself that would make him trust her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the human's steady gaze. He waited, unwavering, his presence almost a quiet challenge in itself. He was right, of course. He had felt her power. He had seen the display of her empire's might. But that wasn't enough. Not for him, and perhaps not for her either. Zarya took a slow, measured breath. She had never been one to show weakness, especially not in front of someone who could undermine her authority. But something about him, his defiance, his refusal to be cowed, made her wonder if she could, for just a moment, let her guard down. In a soft but deliberate motion, she stepped back, signaling for the crowd to disperse. The city around them flickered back into the quiet reality it had been moments before. The energy in the air was still thick, but now it felt more like a veil, one that separated her from the truth. "You want to see my humanity?" Zarya's voice was low, almost hesitant, as she glanced at the man. "Then come with me." The man studied her carefully but nodded. Without another word, they began to walk, leaving the bustling crowd behind. They passed through the streets of the human city, the sounds of distant voices fading as they ventured deeper into the heart of the world. As they moved through the quieter part of the city, Zarya felt her shoulders relax, her pace slowing as the weight of the interaction began to press on her. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but it certainly wasn't this quiet, thoughtful presence. It was as if he was not only seeing her but waiting for something more to unfold. They came to a secluded place on the edge of the city, a small, open clearing surrounded by trees that seemed ancient and untouched. The air here was different, cool and crisp, and for the first time in a long while, Zarya felt a sense of peace that was entirely foreign to her. "Sit with me," she said, her voice unusually soft. She lowered herself to the ground beneath the shade of one of the trees, her posture uncharacteristically relaxed. The human hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between her and the quiet space, before he joined her. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Zarya, normally a creature of action and words, found herself unsure of what to say. She studied the ground beneath her, unsure of how to start this strange and unexpected conversation. The man, sensing her hesitation, was the first to break the silence. "I wasn't expecting this." Zarya let out a breath, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean? You're not what I thought you'd be. I expected more of the queen, more of the conqueror." Zarya smirked slightly, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is that what you think of me? That I am a conqueror?" "You're not." The human's voice was skeptical, but there was a trace of curiosity in it as well. "You've come here to take what you need from us. And now you want me to help you father a child, create a legacy for your empire. You've made it clear what you need." Zarya's expression darkened slightly, but she didn't look away. "I've made it clear what I must do. I am the queen of the Zanari. My people depend on me, and I cannot afford weakness. That is the nature of my world." The human watched her, his eyes softening, and for a moment, Zarya felt a strange sense of vulnerability she hadn't expected. His gaze was not judgmental, but instead filled with understanding. Understanding? She, the ruler of an empire that spanned countless star systems, had never known a human who understood her. "Not like this. There's more to you than just your empire, isn't there?" The man's voice was gentle, but his words struck deep. Zarya's eyes flicked to him. "I've made my choices," she said firmly. "The weight of my crown is heavier than anything you could possibly understand. I have sacrificed everything, my happiness, my desires, for my people, for my empire, and now I have come to you to ensure the survival of both." He didn't respond immediately, but Zarya could feel his eyes on her, his presence pulling something from her, something hidden. "And what of you?" he asked. "What do you want? Beyond all this? Beyond the crown?" Zarya's gaze faltered for the first time in their conversation. The question was simple, but it pierced her more than she cared to admit. What did she want? She had never asked herself that. Her entire life had been devoted to the preservation of her empire, her people, and her legacy. She had never had the luxury to desire something for herself. The very concept was foreign to her. "I want," Zarya's voice faltered, and she took a deep breath. "I want to know that my people will survive, that they will continue to thrive long after I am gone. I want to leave a legacy that matters. The man looked at her, his gaze no longer skeptical, but something closer to pity. And is that all? The survival of your empire? Zarya stood up suddenly, her posture straight and regal once again. She had said too much. This conversation was one she hadn't intended to have. She was the queen, the ruler, the one who commanded armies and fleets. She did not need to explain herself. But the man remained seated, watching her with an expression that spoke more than words ever could. He didn't ask for an explanation. He simply understood. Perhaps that's all I have, Zarya said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. The man didn't answer, but in that silence, something between them shifted again. Something subtle, something unspoken. A connection that went beyond power and politics. It was something far more complex. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread, and Zarya could feel its delicate tension. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt exposed. Her walls had cracked, her carefully constructed armor had faltered, and she wasn't sure how to repair it. She had never needed anyone. Not truly. She had led her people with a singular, ruthless focus, and everything she had done had been for them. But this human, the one she had sought to manipulate, to bend to her will, had opened a door to something else. She wasn't sure if it was a weakness or something entirely new, but the weight of the unknown pressed on her chest. And it was heavy. Turning back to face him, she found the man sitting calmly on the grass, his gaze on her with quiet intensity. His eyes were not filled with judgment or triumph, but something else entirely, something softer. His expression was neither pitying nor condescending. It was simply understanding. Zarya's gaze softened imperceptibly. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "What more do you need to see?" The man's lips curled upward slightly, but his expression remained thoughtful. He didn't answer right away, instead allowing the weight of her question to linger in the air. It wasn't the answer she was seeking, but the question itself felt different. She had been the one to give, the one to offer. Now she found herself asking him for something she wasn't even sure she could provide. "I don't need anything from you, Zarya," he said after a pause, his voice steady. "I don't need you to be perfect or to have all the answers. I need you to be real. And I need you to understand that trust doesn't come without a price." Her brow furrowed at the last word. "A price?" He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, taking a step closer. There was no fear in his posture, no hesitation. If anything, his presence was steadying, as though he was grounding her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Yes," he said simply. "You want my help. You want my trust. But trust isn't just about power. It's about sharing something, about understanding that no one can bear the weight of everything on their own. Not even you." Zarya felt a flicker of something within her, a strange pull toward his words. He was right. She had carried the weight of her empire alone for so long that she had forgotten the very nature of companionship. In all her years as queen, she had never needed anyone. Not truly. But this man, this human, had made her question everything she had built. "And what would you have me share?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was a dangerous question to ask, and yet it slipped from her lips before she could stop it. His gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw the flicker of compassion in his eyes. Something she hadn't expected, especially not from a human. "You've built walls around yourself, Zarya. You hide behind your crown, your empire. But what are you without it? What are you when no one is watching?" She flinched at the question, cut deeper than she cared to admit. She had never allowed herself to truly consider her own identity beyond that of queen. She had built her life around duty, around the expectation that she would lead her people, that she would be the force that ensured their survival. But now, faced with this man, his words cutting through her defenses like a blade, Zarya realized that she didn't know the answer. I am nothing without my people," she said, her voice trembling slightly. It was a truth she had never allowed herself to admit. Her entire existence had been defined by her duty to the Zanari. Without that, what was left? The human stepped closer, his voice gentle. You're more than that, Zarya. You're more than your empire. And if you want my trust, if you want me to help you, you need to understand that. You need to stop hiding behind your power and start seeing the people around you. Not just as tools to get what you want, but as equals. Zarya's heart beat faster, the pressure in her chest growing. She had never allowed herself to see others as equals, not in the way he meant. To her, they had always been beneath her, pawns in a larger game. She was the queen and they were the subjects. There had never been room for anything else. But now, with his words echoing in her mind, she realized how lonely that perspective had made her. She had isolated herself from everyone and everything, convinced that the weight of the empire could only rest on her shoulders. But perhaps he was right. Perhaps she had forgotten what it meant to connect with someone, to trust them, to share the burden, even if it meant revealing her own vulnerability. She took a step back, her mind racing. "What are you asking of me?" she whispered. It was the first time she had ever truly questioned the cost of her own choices. He didn't hesitate. "I'm asking you to let go. Let go of the walls you've built. Let go of the crown, of the power, just for a moment. Trust me. Trust us." Zarya stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to push him away, to retreat into the safety of her empire, to remind herself of who she was. But something within her hesitated. What if he's right? What if, for once, she allowed herself to be something other than a queen? I don't know if I can," she confessed, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I've never been anything but this. The queen. The ruler. I don't know who I am outside of that." The man's gaze softened, and for the first time, Zarya saw no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "You don't have to know everything right now," he said gently, "but you have to be willing to start, to trust that you're more than your title, that you can be more than just a queen." Zarya closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She didn't know what the future held, or what would happen if she allowed herself to trust him. But for the first time in years, she felt a strange sense of possibility, a chance to be more than what she had always been. When she opened her eyes again, she met his gaze. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. The man stepped forward, his hand extending toward her in an offering of something neither of them had ever experienced before. An uncertain, fragile trust. Zarya stared at the human's outstretched hand, the simple gesture almost foreign to her. Her life had never been about connection or compromise. It had been about power, about survival, about keeping her people alive at any cost. To reach out and take his hand. How could she? To trust, to open herself to someone was a dangerous path. She had seen what vulnerability could do to a ruler. She had seen the mighty fall because they had made the mistake of showing weakness. And yet something inside her stirred. The world she had built, the empire she ruled, had always felt like a cage. A cage she had willingly entered. But now, in this quiet clearing with the human before her, there was a strange sense of freedom. Maybe it was the raw honesty in his gaze. Maybe it was the weight of his words, cutting through the barriers she had so carefully erected around herself. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly, the words tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. She wasn't used to admitting weakness, to confessing uncertainty. But with him, there was a quiet understanding, a gentle invitation to shed the armor she had worn for so long. His hand stayed there, steady and unwavering. "You don't have to know everything, Zarya, but you have to be willing to try, to let go of the past, to trust that you're more than your crown, more than the empire." Zarya's gaze fell to the outstretched hand. Her mind raced as the weight of her choices pressed down on her. She was the queen, the ruler of an empire. To trust meant to risk everything, the stability of her people, the legacy of her ancestors. It meant opening herself to betrayal, to disappointment, to the possibility of losing everything she had fought for. And yet she knew, somewhere deep within her, she knew that to keep living this way, isolated, surrounded by power but never by connection, was no way to truly live at all. With a deep breath, she finally stepped forward. Her hand, once so hesitant, now reached out and took his. The moment their fingers touched, something shifted between them. An unspoken understanding, a promise. The world seemed to stop, just for a second, and in that suspended moment, Zaria felt her walls crumble just a little. The human smiled, a quiet, knowing expression. You don't have to be perfect, Zaria. You just have to be real. She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had taken the first step. And yet, something still felt wrong, as though the weight of her crown, her responsibilities, were too much to escape. The queen could not be forgotten, not for long. The empire was always watching. And though the human had shown her kindness, the truth remained. Her people depended on her. Her choices had consequences. There was no escaping that reality. But for the first time in a long while, Zaria wasn't sure she wanted to escape. She didn't want to hide behind the crown, behind the cold, calculated decisions that had kept her people alive. She wanted to be something more. She wanted to be something real. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had spoken the words aloud, the first time she had allowed herself to acknowledge the fear that gnawed at her. Afraid that I don't know who I am without the empire. Without my people. The human, still holding her hand, didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence grounding her. Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to have all the answers. Not yet. But you can trust me. You can trust that I won't leave you. Not unless you push me away. Zaria closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never allowed herself the luxury of trusting anyone like this, not even her closest advisors. She had always assumed that trust was a vulnerability, a weakness. But now, in this moment, she realized that it might just be the one thing that could save her. What happens next? She asked, her voice steady now, though there was still uncertainty there. The human's smile softened. Now we go back. You go back to your people, to your empire. But you don't have to face it alone anymore. I'm with you. We'll face whatever comes next together. Her chest tightened at his words. The idea of sharing the weight of her responsibilities, of not carrying the burden of the empire alone, was almost too much to process. She had never allowed anyone to stand by her side in such a way. She had never let anyone close enough to truly understand the full extent of what she bore. But here he was, offering his support, his trust, without hesitation. Zaria nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that perhaps she could build something new, something more than an empire built on fear and control. You're right, she said quietly. I can't do this alone. I shouldn't. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his gaze steady and warm. We all need someone, Zaria. Even you. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and in that moment, she felt something she had never truly felt before. An understanding, a sense of belonging. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the weight of the universe was entirely on her shoulders. Together, they turned and made their way back to the heart of the city, where the empire awaited. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and threats to their fragile alliance. But Zaria knew that she no longer had to face them alone. She had a partner now, someone who would stand by her side, someone who understood the burden she carried and the fear that lay beneath her strength. As they walked back into the world of the Zanari, the sound of distant voices filled the air, but Zaria's mind was clear. The empire would not fall. It would thrive, perhaps in a way she had never imagined. And with the human beside her, perhaps she would finally find the strength to let go of the past, to embrace something new. Perhaps, together, they could build a future where both the Zanari and humanity could stand side by side. Not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals, as partners. And for the first time in a long while, Zaria felt like she was no longer just the queen. The world of the Zanari felt different to Zaria as she walked beside the human. She could see it now in the flicker of their eyes, in the way the air seemed to hum with potential. The weight of the empire still pressed upon her, but it no longer felt like a crushing burden. For the first time in years, the vision of the future was not a bleak, solitary one. It was one shared with someone who had offered her more than just his help. He had given her the possibility of a different way of living, a way of ruling, a way of being. They reached the Grand Hall, the heart of her empire, where the greatest minds of the Zanari had gathered for centuries to discuss matters of politics, war, and survival. The room was vast, filled with ornate columns and statues that reflected the power of the empire. But today, Zaria saw it through a new lens. It was no longer just a symbol of her dominance. It was a place where change could happen, where hope could be nurtured. "Do you think they'll accept me?" the human asked, his voice quiet as they paused before the massive doors. Zaria turned to him, her gaze steady. He had been with her for days now, a constant presence at her side, offering his insights and questions that, for the first time, made her rethink everything she had taken for granted. He was not only offering his support in private, he was offering it in public as well. "You've earned their respect," she said, her voice tinged with certainty. "They may not trust you yet, but that will change. You've proven yourself worthy of being here." He raised an eyebrow at that, his lips twitching in a half-smile. "I don't know about worthy. I'm just here to help. You're the one who has to make the tough decisions." Zaria felt a stir of something deep inside her. A kind of warmth, a connection that she couldn't quite explain. She was not used to relying on others. She was not used to sharing the mantle of leadership. But in him, she had found a balance. He had shown her that strength didn't come from standing alone at the top. It came from lifting others up, from sharing the weight. She reached for the door, her fingers brushing against the cool metal, and pushed it open. The sound of the hinges echoed in the large chamber as they stepped inside, and the room fell silent. The council of the Zanari were waiting, their faces stoic, their eyes fixed on her as she entered. The humans, they were watching too, standing quietly at the edge of the room, their presence now a part of this new era. Zaria had allowed them into her world, and she would not let their sacrifices go unnoticed. "Zaria," came the voice of her most trusted advisor, a tall figure with piercing yellow eyes who had been by her side since the beginning. "You return with him." His eyes flicked briefly to the human standing beside her. There was no hint of disdain, but the suspicion was still palpable. Zaria didn't hesitate. "This is my ally," she said firmly. "His name is Alaric. He is a man who sees the world not through the lens of power, but through the lens of trust. He has earned his place here, and he will be an equal in the decisions we make going forward." A murmur rippled through the room, but Zaria's gaze swept over them all, her confidence unshaken. She could feel the tension, the skepticism in the air, but she stood taller for it. This was a new dawn, one where things would change, where she would no longer rule with an iron fist, but with the help of those who could guide her with wisdom and compassion. "You ask if they will accept you," she said, her voice louder now, addressing Alaric. "They may not understand you yet, but they will learn. And in time, they will come to see the truth of what we're building." Alaric met her gaze, a quiet understanding between them. He didn't speak, but there was a silent promise in his eyes. He was not here for personal gain. He was here for the Zanari, for their future. Zaria turned her attention back to the council. "For too long, we've ruled through fear," she began, her voice steady, carrying a weight of authority she had never used before. "For too long, we've isolated ourselves from the rest of the galaxy, refusing to consider those who are not like us as equals. But no more. The time has come for us to build a new world, one where power is shared, not hoarded." Her words rang out through the hall, and she could feel their weight settle over the room. The council remained silent, but Zaria could sense the shifting dynamics. They had not heard her speak like this before. She had always been the queen, the unyielding, unbending force. But today she was a leader in a new way. "I will still be your queen," Zaria continued, her gaze sharp. "But I will no longer do this alone. Alaric will stand with me, and together, we will create a future where we are not bound by old traditions, where we embrace cooperation and understanding, and where our strength lies not in our ability to dominate, but in our ability to unite." The room was still. She had spoken boldly, unflinchingly, but the silence that followed was deafening. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Zaria's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for their response. She knew the risk she was taking. She had just overturned everything they had known, everything they had believed in. But she also knew that this was the only way forward. It was then that her advisor spoke again, his voice unexpectedly calm. You've always been a ruler of power, Zaria. But this is different. She nodded. Yes, this is different. And it's time we faced that truth. After a long pause, one of the older council members, a figure known for her wisdom, stepped forward. Her gaze was unwavering. The Empire has always depended on strength. But it also depends on unity. If this is truly what you believe, then we will stand with you. We will support this new vision. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, but there was no opposition. Slowly, one by one, the council members nodded. Zaria had done it. She had convinced them. The weight on her chest lightened, but only slightly. There was still much to be done. Still battles to fight. But for the first time, Zaria felt the possibility of something new. She didn't have to be alone. And with Alaric at her side, she wasn't. As the council session ended and the room began to empty, Zaria turned to Alaric, her expression softening for the first time since they had entered. We did it, she said quietly. He smiled, the expression warm and genuine. No, you did it. I just helped you see what was always there. Zaria's heart swelled. Then I couldn't have done it without you. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent affirmation of the partnership they had forged. And as they walked out into the bright light of the day, Zaria felt something stirring within her: hope, a sense of purpose, of unity, that she had never known before. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.